Welcome to our Game Start program. Tonight's going to be all about gameplay programming, but before we come to that, we've got a short PSA from Gamecity. And that is our prototype funding program is currently open. So until April 8th, you can apply for a funding for your prototype. That means up to 80,000 euros of a non-repayable grant to make your prototype reality. So get those applications in until April 8th. We do recommend to take the mandatory consultation about 2 weeks before that. So shoot us a line for this program this week or next week to schedule that appointment. Once again, apply for the prototype funding until April 8th. But enough about that. Let's dive into our wonderful panel. Just so you know, tonight we are currently in the welcome and introduction part. Next up, we are going to introduce you to our panelists and then have a wonderful discussion round. We've got loads of interesting questions prepared, but we'd also love to hear from all of you in the chat. You can ask your questions anytime and we will relay them to our three panelists. But we also have a dedicated 30 minutes at the end for a Q&A round, so you can also hold on to your questions until then, whatever suits you best. And we will wrap up at 7:30 tonight. So, who's going to tell us all about gameplay programming? We've got the wonderful Tove from 10 Chambers with us, also David, who's an independent contractor, and last but not least, Eric, who is the senior gameplay programmer over at Fishlabs. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Here they are, and I just said 2 words about them, so they can tell you loads more about themselves. First up, Tove, thank you so much for joining us. Who are you and what do you do?
Thank you for inviting me. My name is Tove Backenroth. I work as a junior gameplay programmer at 10 Chambers in Stockholm, Sweden. I've been working there for a little bit over a year. It's my first job in the industry. I came straight from Future Games, vocational education in Sweden.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. David, what about you? Who are you and what are you doing here?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zulic, or David. I work as a gameplay programmer, currently as an independent contractor for one company. Sadly, due to my NDA, I'm not allowed to tell you much more detail. But I work in the games industry for some 12 years already. And for the most part, I'm focusing on gameplay and more specifically on the physics and everything that has to do with like physics simulation and so on.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And also Eric, hi. Thanks for joining. What do you do?
Hi, thank you for inviting me as well. Yes, I've been working for Fishlabs for about almost 5 years. I think I hit my 5-year mark this year. And I've been here working as a gameplay programmer, basically following my passion, my dream of making video games. I originally come from South America, from Venezuela, and been here in Germany for over 10 years. So yeah, it's been great to be here.
Thank you. I think following your passion is something a lot of our audience can relate to. But there's one more person who I didn't mention until now. How very rude of me. And that is my lovely colleague, Anna, who will take us into the juicy part for now.
Hello, everyone. So the juicy part is like more an explanation of the job of a game programmer, so don't be scared. The first question that I have would be for Eric. Maybe you can start with how would you describe the job of a gameplay programmer on paper? Is there a description that you can tell us?
Yes, of course. I would say that the best description is something that you are very tied to the player. So everything that you're developing for a game is something that's very close to what people can feel and touch, as a means of whenever you press a button on your controller or you do an action, it's something that is properly related to something in the gameplay. So we're involved in all of the parts that are communicated to the player and how they feel the game, how much fun they have, basically.
Okay, thank you. Can you add, David, to the description of a gameplay programmer? Is there anything more you would say there is to that?
Yes, so I agree with the description. It's actually pretty well put. For me, the one important part also is that maybe gameplay programming is this link that then connects the art of the game as a medium with the technology, and then also something that allows players to have the interaction with, which is like the defining property of the games. But yes, this would be some short.
Okay, so we have like an introduction to that. Maybe we can head over to a question that is also very often asked. Tove, maybe you can tell us about the tools you use most. I think this will be interesting for people to know. Are there specific tools? Is there anything to know about the engines? Maybe you can start with explaining that.
Yeah, of course. And what tools you use definitely vary on what company you work on. On bigger companies, you probably have a lot more in-house tools that you use. But for me, in my day-to-day work, I usually just use my IDE and my engine of choice or company choice. And in my case, it's Unity. But I bet Erick and David probably have other engines and tools that they use.
Yes, maybe you can add to that. Is there more that you can say from your experience, David? What do you use more? Or can you say something about the tools?
Yes, of course. So at my at my current job and in the previous company, we have used Unreal almost exclusively. So Unreal Engine, in particular Unreal Engine 4, because the project is already in a mature stage, and it makes no sense switching now in the middle of it. But besides that, what I think is really important for gameplay programmers in particular, outside of job, that you also have something for maybe some quick prototypes and testing of some ideas that you might have and so on. And in that case, at least in my opinion, the simpler the game engine is, the better for you to get something running really quickly. And yes, I mean, personally, I have used a bunch of smaller frameworks as well, but also from the other engines like Unity, it has proven to be like a really valuable tool. And on the other side, maybe from a bit more technical side, there might be some implementations in one engine that come shipped with the engine itself that are not available in the other. And maybe you could get some ideas easier that way, because sometimes I mean, most of the times it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel. And yes, so.
Erick, do you agree with that? Not reinventing the wheel, or do you say there is something you could use in all of the tools?
Yeah, sure. I think that for to become a gameplay programmer or to do what we do, it's not necessary to have an engine in particular. You can basically do this with not even programming. You can also do some visual coding. There's some engines that allow you to do that. Like Unity and Unreal have a pretty solid, I think, system that people can use and don't need to go dive into code, which is something like the biggest barrier for some people to come in to do what we do. But yeah, as David said, yeah, we like a lot of the industries right now focus on Unreal Engine. I think it's one of the most popular ones. And getting into that can be a bit difficult because of the size of the engine and the complexity of all the systems involved. And it could be a little bit hard as an entry point. But as soon as people have the passion for it, I think you can start learning the small systems and start creating something on your own. I think that's the biggest point of entry, basically.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you can tell us more about the workflow. Is there a typical workflow in gameplay programming? So I have no idea, but is there something you can tell us about how you use the engine, or how you implement your workflow in your job?
I think that really depends on what the task at hand is, of course, but usually you would start with a prototype of a feature that you want to have. Let's sort of say that you start making your own game and you start making your first thing. You need to have a plan of what that game is going to look like. So you start having small chunks of the game done step by step. And that has to start with something either could be UI related, could be something that is directly how the player moves and how the input is going to look like. So depending on the task at hand, you start to tackle things. But as a gameplay programmer, I can tell that you need to know about all the systems basically to be able to understand what can be coupled in with what you want to achieve. Yeah.
Oh, can you add, David? Is there something you would add to the workflow, or is there something on your experience?
Yes. Like Eric said, it always depends on the project and on the needs of the particular project or the feature or whatever. But there are some things that are universal, and that this is in my experience and in my opinion, the value of prototyping. So it is not really limited only to gameplay programming, because for programmers it's quite difficult to have some ideas already somewhat developed in the head, and then you would just write them down, and often it would not turn out like you have expected, or there would be some edge cases that you were not able to predict, or something that would just, and this is like maybe a particularity of the gameplay programming, is that even if something is technically perfect and it all works and it's performant, it just doesn't feel good, and then you need to scrap the feature. And the sooner you can get that loop, and as soon as you can, so to say, basically fail, the better, because gameplay programming itself also involves other disciplines. So if you have multiple teams depending on the feature you're developing, and then, dumb example, but if you decide after 3 months that you need to abandon something because it's just not feasible, then it's not only 3 months of your work, it's the 3 months of a bunch of people's work, and this is where the costs start accumulating. But yes, in my opinion, basically the lower the barrier is in the engine for you to get something running, even in the crudest, roughest form, the better. Because you can always optimize. I mean, you should optimize in time, but I think in particular in the gameplay programming, you should get the idea to the screen first and then worry about the optimization.
I see a lot of nodding there. This sounds great. Maybe Tove, you can add about you said it, David, about the team. Is there how is there a workday how is the workday for you, Tove? Maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview. How does it work?
Yeah, definitely. I think what David just said about that the gameplay programmers are usually intertwined with a lot of different other teams is very, very important and accurate for gameplay programming. So a normal workday for me is that, I mean, most of the time I do sit by my computer and just work on the tasks at hand, but those tasks also involve meetings with other departments, and also just having one-on-one meetings, maybe just face-to-face, approach other designers of different specializations. Depends on the thing I'm working on, whoever's affected by it, and have discussions about our expectations on how that specific feature is supposed to work. Because yeah, it involves a lot of iterations, and I can't just sit by myself and do the things at hand. Yeah.
Thank you. And Eric, in your experience as a gameplay programmer, is there a difference in the team size? So maybe you can tell us about how there are differences from your point of view.
Yeah, I can start by adding that a lot of the time that depends on the project stage, but in the beginning of the project, they're usually hand in hand with the combat designers or with the designers that are working with you on the features. You're pretty much tied to them all the time. So a regular workday would be working with them the whole day, basically sharing ideas and trying to find the right prototyping for what you want to achieve. Later down the project, you are going to be working with audio designers, with people on the UI team, people on the mission team doing missions and objectives and trying to get the NPCs working properly. There's a lot of aspects during a development cycle. And the team size, of course, will also drive you to that, because when the team is smaller, you're going to have more freedom to do your own ideas, or maybe you're going to try to push some other boundaries that you wouldn't do if the team is bigger, because then it becomes more specialized into something that you want to achieve. If you wouldn't have like a person that's there to design the systems, then you're going to have to start coming up with some ideas by yourself. Usually somebody's going to be there approving those changes, but in a smaller team, I think you will have more faster development into the systems that go into the game. Whenever you have a bigger team, the pipeline is a little bit longer, so it takes longer to create a feature because it has to come hand in hand with so many people that they have to make decisions. Yeah, that's what I could say.
Oh, thank you. Maybe David, you can add to this. Are there more programming specialists in teams that are bigger, or is the gameplay programmer all there is in the creation of a game?
No, of course not. Especially in the bigger companies, the segmentation is also greater. So depending on the scale of the project and how the team is structured, there will often be multiple different disciplines of programming. And in that, I just from top of my head, for example, you could have some UI programmers, you can have tools programmers, graphics programmers, audio programmers. It all depends on the let's say the size of the production. So the bigger the production is, there is and higher the quality level, the expected quality level of the project is, there is more need for a more specialized people, because besides programming being a job, I would also say it's a bit of a craft that you just get better over time. And then of course, if you specialize in one particular thing, you will be extremely good at that one thing. So far in my experience, I have mainly worked with mid-sized companies. So I don't really have direct experience with some, let's say 500, 600 people companies that, but those also exist, even larger. And from what I have learned due to like some conferences and just meeting people who worked at such places, it comes down basically to that, to having teams of highly specialized people for one particular thing. And I guess only in that way it's possible to have, just from top of my head, like a project like GTA 5 or now 6 would not be possible in any shape or form if it was done by, I don't know, handful of people. That would be insane to even imagine or assume. But also, like Erick said, the benefit of a smaller team is that you have fewer people that are skilled in multiple areas, and you can rely on them on solving some problems that are a little bit outside of their specialization. And in many cases, that can be really valuable, because besides having like those like all-rounders, let's say, you also have fewer lines of communications, and in that case, the messages from one person to another will not get lost in some noise, and the idea of the team or a person will sooner be iterated upon. And this is, I think, this was proven multiple times to be like a, let's say, competitive advantage of smaller teams, or even like a single person games, or I don't know, like this fast iteration is basically the biggest advantage.
Okay, thank you. That was really a lot of great info on that. Maybe we can break it down a bit again. Maybe we are saying things again, but I want to understand everything, and maybe other people too. Are there typical challenges in gameplay programming that are the most you have in your tasks, Tove? Can you tell about that, or maybe someone else can start with typical challenges? Maybe
I
don't-
can give a short
Yeah.
I can give a short answer because I can't say that much because I'm currently working on a project that's announced but it's not out
Okay.
yet, so I can't go into specifics, but I would say that one like more generic challenge of gameplay programming in day-to-day is that we are working so closely with the feel of the game and the player experience, which is a very subjective thing. Which and sometimes we think that we know best, and sometimes we do know what feels good and what doesn't. But a lot of discussions usually spread out into maybe 10 different experiences and opinions about how something should feel and how things should work, which is, you're just going to have to talk it out, basically. But that's, I think, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
maybe add something.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So what Tove said is like really exactly nailing it. That's one of the biggest challenges, to get the features that you're working on to feel good for all players, even though it's hard to say subjective, as Tove said. But that's why when you are in a bigger team, you don't have to do this yourself. You have other people also looking into this. The whole team is basically testing the game all the time, trying to find that right spot for what you're working on. But it feels really great when you nail something and people enjoy it. I can also add that there are some different types of also gameplay programming. Some games might involve multiplayer, which is also adding another layer of difficulty into the games that we do. And that in that case, the biggest risk is to fix the issues that you create by doing some features. In my day-to-day, I'm currently working on some game that's multiplayer related. So I have a lot of, well, not problems, but challenges trying to fix some of the biggest networking issues, basically.
Okay, thank you. I have one question for David and Eric on your career so far. What was your most unusual task or surprising task in gameplay programming so far? If you can tell something that was something you didn't expect to happen, or maybe a fun story, if you have any. If you don't, keep it to yourself. And
I might add, it's not directly related to the gameplay programming, but just how varied the features might get. So the features on which you would work. So on one of our projects, we maybe you have seen the trailers or the game itself. It was called Misfits. And the gameplay, so it was a multiplayer arena game where you would control different toys, and the gist of it was that you would be able to control body of it, or actually you're controlling a head of a toy, and you are able to attach yourself to a different bodies. So imagine like a kid would take toys and mix and match them differently, and with those combinations you would already unlock some additional skills, and then on top of that you could also use different items. So just realizing how many permutations you can get from, let's say, 10 of each of those, and how many unexpected results can occur based on that. And then on top of that, the game was multiplayer. So like Eric said, there is a lot of engineering going into making that work at all to begin with. And that was, I would say, by far one of the more unique challenges in my career. From the also one interesting, so on our previous project, we had this this gameplay mechanic where the character would be able to eject out of the, so the character was driving a vehicle. Again, my curse of working always in multiplayer games. So you would drive a vehicle, you would be able to eject out of the vehicle, and then you would be able to recall the vehicle while in the air or when you land. And all of that needs to work over the multiplayer. If someone hits you, if someone attaches to your vehicle, if someone, so the number of edge cases explodes within a few days you're already facing like like within a few days of testing you will just get like a list of 200 issues that you need to solve. So that's that would be the let's say the two most extreme cases that I had faced so far. But,
This sounds wonderful. What great time you had. Thank you so much for your insight. I have a question for Tove too, because you started in the games industry right now. What made you specialize in gameplay programming?
Ooh, that's a good question, actually. My journey into being interested in working in game development was actually music. Because I have a big background in music. So that's what I started to study initially, was like music composition. And I did that for 3 years and realized like halfway into the education, it was very clear that there's not that many jobs for composers. It's a very, very hard industry to get into. So I got a lot of advice to like learn audio programming. That's a very good side hustle. Like just being more technically competent can definitely give you an edge. So I just started taking some side courses in programming and realized that I found that way more fun than composing music. So that's where I took a pivot. And I'm still very interested in audio programming, and I was very new to programming when I started at Future Games. So I chose gameplay programming maybe a little bit because it is tends to be a more generalist title. If you think about all the different programming titles that you can have at a game company. And I really enjoy exploring and doing a lot of different things and not being super niche specialized into one specific field of programming. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And Erick, for you, why did you specialize in gameplay programming? The short version?
Yeah, I was gonna say that can take a while.
Oh no.
Basically, I've always been my passion has always been involved with video games, and basically I came to Germany to look for that exactly, to become a part of a company that makes games. I didn't have a specific direction of what I wanted to do, but I landed on my feet basically on a company making some sort of gameplay related work. But my passion was always being part of console games, like things that you could, have action or have more, I don't know, more fun, I would say. I used to work in a browser gaming company, but making browser games, and that was not really my passion. So I had to ramp up the game and try to learn other skills to be able to reach where I am right now. So yeah, I think it's deeper than what I'm trying to say right now, but definitely my passion has always been part of the gaming industry. And as Tove said, being a gameplay programmer, you're aware of all the systems and you have to touch pretty much everything in what we do. So that's also really fun.
Oh, thank you. And David, maybe you can add, and I have a last question after that from the chat. So from on that part of the questions.
So in short, I was interested in let's say game development in general since I was in ground school already, and that was in the era of, let's say, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64 and something like that. So the available tools and generally knowledge that you could acquire was really limited, especially because I come from Bosnia and there was basically no game development. And then at one point, I don't know if I'm aging myself here a bit, but I have seen that if you know the game Serious Sam, it was created by a Croatian team, which is basically 150 kilometers from my house. And then that was like one spark that okay, this is possible. This is a career that I could pursue actually eventually. I mean, and yes, since then I was always interested in started with modding of the different games, making levels, making some trivial gameplay features and so on. And then let's say I got serious when the Unity was released as like one of the, at that time, one of the few publicly available game engines, and actually pretty easy one to learn. I mean, compared to what was available back then. And since then, I have just decided that this is the path for me, and I'm just following.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much for giving us an overview over what you actually do. I have one question from the chat. Maybe one of you can answer. It's, does a gameplay programmer need to take over other programmers' work when needed at some point? For example, if a UI programmer needs help, do you take over or do you combine your knowledge? Is anyone, can anyone answer that, or all of you?
I can maybe
nodding? Yes, thank
chime
you.
in. Yeah, definitely. If it's not something very specific to that particular issue, then yeah, definitely one of us can take care of that. I have taken so many issues or bugs or features from people that should have been more specialized into that particular thing, and been the one dealing with that. As an example, I have been working with the audio team in my studio for a long time. I have been part of implementing a lot of audio features, even though you could say that an audio programmer would be the one doing this, but I've been the one working with them very closely for a long time. So definitely can happen.
Okay, thank you. So now Helen will take over because we already dabbled into the start of the career and how to get into this field. So Helen will take over for now.
Yes, thank you. Also, thanks to the very active chat, we've seen all your questions. Keep them coming. We're going to either incorporate them or, like we mentioned before, we are going to add them in the Q&A part. But yeah, let's keep moving into the topic of the ideal career starter, the one that HR dreams about. You already told us a bit about your paths into the industry. And our very first question would be, in your experience or your opinion, what formal education does someone need who wants to get into gameplay programming? Maybe Tove, you can kick us off as you're closest to that area.
Yeah. I can of course speak for Sweden. I'd say in Sweden it's mostly usual that you have had either a formal or a vocational education beforehand. However, I wouldn't say that it is necessary because game development is such a practical craft, and I really do believe that you could learn to make really, really cool games at home. But of course, it's in an ideal world where you can live and eat for free, and you have 8 hours a day and the real focus to learn how to make games on your own at home. Of course, you can. But I would say that especially a vocational education is very beneficial because it gets you started. You learn a lot, and you also get to in contact with a lot of your future industry coworkers.
That makes total sense to me. Eric, I saw you nodding along. Do you agree a vocational education is most important and a formal one is more of a nice add-on, or would you advocate for a formal education?
I would say that since I come from a third world country from South America, I always thought that having a degree in some career would help me definitely kick off and find something like the first job. But that was not the case. I honestly, while I was still studying my university, many times I thought I was kind of wasting my time instead of focusing on what I wanted to do. But of course, I wanted to have something in hand to prove that I knew what I'm doing. But yeah, as Tove mentioned, I never heard or have anyone requested any of those degrees or titles that one got. Especially, they're mostly interested in your skills, what you can achieve, some more practical skills that you can get things done, basically. But yeah, it's definitely good to go through your education because you learn a lot of the things that you're going to be using on your work tasks, especially for gameplay programming and maths, for example, which is something that, depending on what you're working on, you're going to be it's going to be useful for you to have in your tool set.
All right. I think, David, you already told us you're rather self-taught. Is that correct?
Well, so in a way, yes. But I have a bit let's say, unconventional background, because by education, I'm an accountant or auditor, so which of course has almost nothing to do with the gameplay programming itself, luckily. But on top of that, I have finished bachelor studies in electronics here in Vienna, which also is kind of related, but not really. But my point is that to be a good gameplay programmer, you don't need any kind of education. You can learn most of it by yourself. But like Tove said, the school will provide you with, besides the education, the school will provide you with contacts as well. And on top of that, it will provide you with guidance that might be indirectly applied to your job later. So, but in my case in particular, I have decided to study electronics. In particular, it's called embedded electronics. So basically everything that has to do with small computers on like a single board, something like a Raspberry or would be an example, is that it was for me a chance to learn also like a really low-end programming, which then proved to be really useful when it came eventually in our projects, when it came to optimization and to solving some things that are not, with which many programs are not really comfortable or familiar with. So there is definitely some benefit. And I think particularly, this might be like a little bit also specific for my case, but since I come from non-EU country, it is drastically easier to get a visa if you have a university degree, which again doesn't really relate to a gameplay programming at all. But even if you want to work as a gameplay programmer, coming from some non-EU country and so on, it could be an additional difficulty if you don't have any paper to prove your, so to say, worth, for a lack of better term. So ideally, what I would recommend to anyone is to at least try going to the university. We are, at least in Austria, it's pretty cheap to attend one. I believe in Germany it's also pretty similar. So you can try going for a few semesters. For example, sorry for taking a bit longer, but one thing that was actually really beneficial for me is also both in the economics university and in the electronics was the math courses, which were which at least for me would be really difficult to learn on my own and without any like guidance. So this like formal math is something that has proven to be extremely useful in the career. So if anything, try attending first 2 semesters when you have those classes and see from there.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I think it's always great to hear what very different paths into the industry there are and what people did in their past lives. If I remember the last panel we did, one participant was an archaeologist before switching into quest design, which we talked about last time. And I think that's always very fun to hear. Tove, maybe you can tell us, like your vocation or your vocational education was very close to what you're doing now, but do you remember any specific classes or courses that just relate exactly to what you're doing now?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. As David just mentioned, I had maths courses in my vocational education, specifically like linear algebra, vector maths. I used that on a daily basis, so that was very, very good, very necessary to learn. Also had a classic course that I think most, if you've studied computer science or anything tech code related, you've probably had a course in data structures and algorithms and probably hated it. But it's it's very good knowledge, and it's definitely one of the harder courses to take, but it's definitely applicable also on my everyday work.
We just got a question from the chat that relates to that. Can you maybe give us a real example where math was needed for your work? Tove, do you remember anything?
Well, I mean, maths, I mean, every single movement in the game, every single thing that you see move on the screen is either physics. It's physics, well, which is math. If you're a UI programmer, if you have something UI related on the screen that is being animated, that's probably also in the core maths. And if you're only doing prototype, very high level prototyping, then you probably just have a function you can call to do those things. But in many cases, you do those things from scratch, which means that yeah, you will have to get in there. You will have to animate using maths.
Bad news for people like me, but I'm glad it works out for you. But Eric, do you remember anything else? Anytime you had to get out your calculator actually during your job?
Yeah, I must add that depending on the engine that you're using, so the most advanced engines already take care of a lot of things for you, so you don't have to worry too much about maths. So that's a good thing for people that are starting into the engine. Don't think this is super hard and difficult. But yeah, definitely I had to use maths for quite some things before. One good example would be a turret that I had to implement. I work on a space shooter game called Chorus, and I was implementing the initial turret aiming component. So how would the turrets target the player or the enemy, sorry. And in that case, I had to turn into maths to try to figure it out, the trigonometry necessary to make the turrets aim at the player properly. And it also can become more difficult if you have to have a game like in that one, which is in space, and you have to try to make the turret shoot ahead of the player or ahead of the enemy, so that it actually reaches the target on the time that the velocity of that actor reaches the point where it should intercept the collision. So those things can get complicated very quickly, especially if you have special rotations, or if the turret is attached to another spaceship that is rotating as well, and it can become a mess. Also, there's a lot of maths involved in animation sometimes. If you want to implement an animation system from scratch and you need to find out how to rotate the player in the right direction or how to move things, yeah, it's sometimes necessary. And definitely trigonometry was like my most important class that I had in the university so far.
All right. So we've heard that a general knowledge of math and an interest in that is definitely an advantage. But apart from that, what else? What other hard and soft skills should a career starter bring to the table in your experience? David, maybe you can kick us off. What do you think?
I also have a pretty decent view on this, because I was also involved in hiring multiple people, and also in leading like small teams and so on. And just the communication, although it might sound like a cliche, but the communication between the team members and how people are handling the communication is extremely important. And trying to like having a skill to put yourself in someone else's shoes as well. So when, let's say as a technical person, when I'm trying to explain something to a designer or to a game director, why something is possible or not possible and so on, I should also have a skill to explain something in a way that they would understand. But I also need to be able to understand when they are explaining, when they are requesting something, and how would that translate into the actual code. This might sound like a little bit controversial, but recently there are many, for example, large language models that are threatening the programmer's existence with this. If you have seen I don't know, ChatGPT and Devin AI and so on. But one of the jokes is that we are safe because to get it to do something, you need to really verbosely explain what do you want. So, and this is something that's still not solved, at least to my knowledge. But yes, the communication and just I would put it in one word, like empathy, basically, for other team members. Because as a gameplay programmer, and also as a team lead, I was involved with the game director, with the game designers, with the animators, with the VFX artists, with the audio guys. So it's a vast number of different disciplines, and not everyone has this particular way of thinking about something. And this is not to say that one way or the other is right. They are all right. They are just expressed differently, and you need to have a skill to parse that and to also to communicate that. So yeah, that would be in my opinion, one of the most important skills to develop.
That is an answer we've heard in the past. Definitely, you need empathy to work in games, and I think it's one of my favorite answers. Erick, what's another hard or soft skill people should bring to the table in your experience?
Well, empathy, definitely, yes, as they mentioned already. But yeah, the ability to also morph into different positions as well, as we mentioned before. You're not going to be doing only combat. You're not going to be doing only UI. You have to be like an octopus. You have to know a little bit of everything. So when I started learning my career into, in this case, the Unreal Engine, which was my passion engine, I started learning a lot of everything at the same time. I got into animation systems. I got into the UI. Into how the audio is implemented. Like I had to dive into every single system to try to understand how it works. And that is eventually helped me being where I am, because I can now tackle a lot of different topics at the same time. I can help people around because I have some knowledge to actually share, or to by myself tackle some issues as well.
Thank you. David, do you have something to add? Oh, you are currently still on mute.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, just something came to mind while Erick was giving his input. One really important skill that I have often seen lacking in let's say junior programmers or interns is misunderstanding of the context. So as a gameplay programmers, we are, let's say, blessed to work on a pretty high abstraction in programming. So something that's really close to the end result that will be shown on the screen. And often people, especially coming from like a really highly technical university, let's say, would obsess over like really optimized, best possible, best optimizations in the world, while the feature is still not working properly, or it is developed in a way that is then extremely difficult to understand or to maintain. So just understanding that, for example, there is a slight difference if you're multiplying a vector by scalar value or scalar by a vector value. But in the context of gameplay programming, for the most cases, this is nothing. This like does, and if one thing makes the code more readable and more maintainable, just go with the code that's easier to read and easier to understand, because someone else will have to inherit your work eventually, and someone else will have to deal. And then I don't doubt that many people are extremely talented in writing extremely optimized code, but sometimes that's more of a trouble than it's worth in the end result. Of course, if you're some kind of an engine programming and you're working on some system that's reused 1 billion times through the game, then of course every bit counts. But in the gameplay programming, at least in the kind that I was involved with, it's not really ultimately important. Such let's say really specific optimizations. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. Tove, do you have any other hard or soft skills in mind that people should bring to the table?
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more with both Erick and David said. I think I was about to bring up exactly what David said about that. Well, you should know, always do what's better for the project, not necessarily what's more complicated and cool to do. Some things will definitely have to be less complex and just do whatever works, whatever fits. But and I guess that kind of comes into as well a generic sense of humbleness, with being curious in exploring new areas, and asking questions. I feel like game development is a very creative craft. A lot of people want to be very proud of what they're doing and want to show off that you are a very competent developer. But I think a part of that is asking a lot of questions when you're new, admitting that sometimes you haven't done your best work, and try to always strive to improve. Especially when you're applying for a job. You're not going to be your first job, I mean, you're not going to be a master programmer. There's going to be a lot of flaws in your code, and that's okay. You want your first job to be able to improve and get better.
Yeah, thank you. So you need to bring loads of things, but please leave your overly big ego at home.
Yes.
Let's sum it up. All right. So that's for the dream ideal career starter. Then I'll pass it back to Anna, who will hopefully prod you for some great tips for people who are interested in gameplay programming.
Yes, now we come to the tips and tricks and hacks. No, the magic. No, we always ask this question to people in the games industry: is there a common mistake or a common misconception about the games industry, and particularly gameplay programming, that you encounter in game career starters? Maybe David, you can explain to us what are misconceptions, what are people not getting right when they want to start in the industry or as a gameplay programmer? Do they misunderstand maybe the work?
One common misconception is about let's say the structure of the code and how clean the, let's say, professional projects are. People are always there is a good amount of I would say imposter syndrome, where people are doubting their own projects and they are kind of even ashamed to publish them anywhere, to release them anywhere publicly, assuming that these like grand multi-million projects are pristine in how they are implemented. And so I would say in particular gameplay code is in most cases smoke and mirrors, and often a lot of effort goes into hiding something, or at least not making it so obviously ugly, in hope to not to trick the player, but to create an illusion of and even the games or movies by themselves are an illusion of movement. Of course, these are all discrete images that are happening a certain amount of time per second and so, but it's our perception that's limited, and then we get this illusion of movement. Also, I mean, this would already be a meme at this point, that assuming that gameplay programming is easy, which compared to some other parts, it is definitely less abstract and less specialized in something, but it is also on the other side so vast, and you need to be aware of many different fields and particularities of these fields to be able to work efficiently as a gameplay programmer. For that, I can give like a simple example is the difference when simulating, for example, a jump of a character. There is the animated part that the players see, and then there is something completely different in many cases that is happening on the sides of the physics, and even those physics are somehow limited and let's say moderated to provide the best possible experience. One of the typical example is like, let's say in Mario, it's called this coyote time, where you have like a bit of extra time after you fall through the crack to jump again, and it still counts because it just feels better. And yes, those are the whole gameplay programming could be described as like smoke and mirrors, basically, the shortest.
Yeah, we are back to the magic words, the magic area. Erick, you want to add to the misconceptions or the magic?
Yeah, a little bit. I just thought about when I was explaining to family members or friends what I was working as, what kind of role I had in my studio, and whenever they would see the game that I was working on, they would be like, "Oh, you made this or you made that." They thought that I was making pretty much the whole game, and that's a very big misconception of people. They don't understand exactly what you're doing, so you have to pretty good try to explain like what bits and parts of that big game that everyone created with you is a tiny part of you. So it's not that they would see like a weapon and they will be like, oh wow, you did this sword is amazing. Like, no, I didn't do any of that. I implemented some of it, but there's so many other people working behind it that make this possible. That's a big misconception, at least that I got from some of my friends. And another thing that I think is a misconception is something about working times. I think some people think that we overwork, or we have to work on the weekends, or like the industry itself is making people work longer than expected, especially if you're on the lower end of the chain, like you're starting a new job or something like that. And at least on my experience, that hasn't been the case. Maybe some countries have that, but so far, I think we all have the same working times as normal people. And yeah, sometimes we have something what we call crunch, that we have to push a little bit harder on a project when it's about to be released, or we're in a tight deadline or something. But it's not very common, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tove, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I have a common misconception that's I think a lot of areas in game dev experiences this misconception, but I think it's more normal or more occurring at programmers specifically, and that's that we're all basement dwelling introverts that don't really talk or communicate. I think we're all by nature nerds and love to shut ourselves into a room and play games, but we yap all day, and being in meetings and being social is a very, very big part of the job, actually.
Yeah, thank you. That's what we learned too with a lot of people we talked to. And David, you have another thing to add to the misconception on your work?
Yes, no, I really like this point that Erick made about overworking oneself. This is that there definitely exists a fear of crunch in the industry that was created through various articles and actual cases that were happening. But at least in this part of Europe, it's pretty good, I would say. And one thing I would add that let's say at least in this part of the world, if anyone notices that people are overworked in a company, if you just see that within the first month 3 weekends were being worked and people are staying longer than, and especially really troublesome is if you see leads staying over the weekend, staying long hours, and set like a really, let's say, bad expectations then from the younger. This would be a huge red flag, and I would suggest anyone to just look for something else, because so far, I mean, of course, in my experience again, this was a clear indicator that the project will be in trouble when it comes to, and most of this comes just from expecting too much, and in many cases it comes from egoism, and just it's based in something irrational. And for anyone starting in the industry, this would be like a huge red flag to just look for another. There are plenty of game studios in Europe, so you can probably find a better place to work.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. I will head over to the career starters who want to go deeper into, who want to start in gameplay programming. How do you apply for a job in gameplay programming? Do you submit a portfolio? What does it look like? Maybe Tove, you can start with from your experience, and the others can tell from theirs.
Yeah, for sure. In my experience, you do use portfolio. I know that it's popular as well to use GitHub, but in Sweden, I think portfolios are more common way to go with your first job, which is usually a very, very simple website. You don't have to make it super fancy, as little buttons and extra details as possible, but just display your most proudest work with some code snippets, some descriptions, maybe some images and moving images of things that you've done, and along with a resume. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This sounds nice. Erick, in your opinion, what's a portfolio, or what do you need to apply for a gameplay programming job?
Yeah, I want to add that a lot of people, when they apply to jobs in gameplay programming, they usually attach a lot of code or a project in GitHub, or I think it's very difficult for recruiters or people that are on the hiring positions to look at all those projects and look at all the code and try to understand what's going on. So I would recommend anyone that's trying to look for a job or get into the industry to not only make a project and put the code in there, but also try to make a small video about what you did. Try to explain it and make it as short as possible so that people can understand what's happening. I think that's greatly going to increase your chances that somebody's going to take a look at what you're doing and how it's working. So they're going to understand a bit more without having to look into the whole code and trying to understand it, what you're trying to achieve.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that sounds right. I was thinking about all the lines of things to read and learn. Oh, maybe this would take a long time to decide. David, in your experience, is there anything more people can add to their
Yes.
application?
Yes, so I would say even before, like Eric mentioned, there is this barrier that you need to go through with, let's say, someone who is responsible for hiring. So if it's a hiring manager or so, to solve that, you could, what I would recommend to anyone, like applying for a job or wanting to apply soon, is to visit as many conferences as you can and meet people face to face. This, at least in my case, this has proven to be way more useful than any perfect portfolio or CV or anything. If you can manage to have some time talking with the people who are already working in the industry, and you believe that you have something to bring to the table. At least in game industry, in my experience, people are very welcoming and they are very open in discussing various features. For example, I had a chance to talk with one physics programmer with, I would say, 25 years of experience or something like that, working on huge titles. And this person allocated like 1 hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, just to explain me one particularity of the, not to go too much detail, but something about the tire simulation and how it's handled in their game. And this has opened my eyes greatly for the future. But what's more important, I'm still in a good relationship with that person, and I can always ask for advice and so on. And then if they have an opening in their company, of course, and I'm interested in applying, it will be much easier to just ask directly and see. Sometimes this barrier of HR or the hiring managers is like Eric said, this GitHub code and stuff can be a bit too abstract and a bit too specialized for them to understand. So either if you cannot go to the conferences, of course, you can always make a video. You can make a Steam demo. This is also refrain yourself from sending like executable files to someone via email. Never do that. No one will ever open them. Try to publish something on Steam. itch.io if you really have to, but if you, of course, Steam is an investment. Let's say it's like €100 per game that you publish, but think of it as like an investment in yourself, and this, just being able to publish something on Steam already shows me a lot about the person that I would potentially hire. So yeah, that would be, but conferences are still like number one in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Connect, meet people, meet these friendly, shiny people who want to work in the industry. That's a great advice. And Eric, do you want to add something to this too? And then we will head over to some chat questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it quick. I just want to say that you don't need to make a full game to apply to a studio. I think the best thing that you can do is try to find out what the studio is trying to do, or in general, what kind of project they're working on, and then focus on like a specific thing that you think it's interesting. Let's say that the company is working on a third-person shooter, so that you do something about like a cover system that you can do like a very specific small feature that you can show them on a video and maybe with some code and you have to support it, and then you can apply to that if you want to present something on your portfolio for this. I think that's the most best way to approach this.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. Really helpful. There is one question regarding application. Someone asked, may one apply to a job if the tools don't match with the application? For example, if they if I would use Unity and the application wants an Unreal gameplay programmer, is there a chance I still get the job? This is an interesting question. So what do you say? This is a very specific question, but in your experience, can this work, or is it like maybe not this job?
I think it can go either way.
Yeah.
If I may start.
Yeah.
I think that if let's say that we have two applicants, we have you who is experienced to have 3 years of experience in Unity, and then we have another applicant who has 3 years of Unreal experience. Then of course that person will have a technical benefit with their application because they already know the engine. But let's say that maybe you are a way more company fit. Maybe you are way more specialized and you're very interested in the type of games that they're making, and they see that you're a culture fit. Then the odds might still be in your favor, because at the end of the day, I think that in your career as a gameplay programmer, you will work in several different engines and several different languages. And at the end of the day, code is code. Of course, there will still be an onboarding time where you will be new to the tools that each company uses, but you can still be proficient in their engine in no time.
If I can add something to this, basically, at least now there are so many learning resources that there is, in my opinion, there is not much of an excuse that you can have for not learning one part. So if you find a company that is using Unreal in particular, and you have let's say 3 years of experience in Unity or whatever other engine, you can dedicate a month to learning Unreal. 1 hour a day, whatever. After that month, you will already, if you have the game programming experience, you will be already capable of doing whatever you can do in Unity in Unreal. Of course, there are always some technicalities that will be a bit difficult to learn, but or to grasp. But in my experience, also, this would show like the initiative, and even just stating that in the interview. Okay, I have whatever amount of experience in this engine, but just for this job, I'm willing to learn Unreal, and this is how far I've got. Of course, there is an onboarding process, and we did have some in this case interns who would within a month would be perfectly comfortable in Unreal, and they mostly came from Unity or Godot. So just showing the initiative, and of course, if the company is there is also something to be said about the specificity of that particular role. Like maybe they are in a pinch and they really want a specialized person, but for junior position that will almost never be the case. So I would say not learning, and especially now, not learning Unreal is just detrimental. And it's not so like the people are afraid of C++, but the C++ used on a surface level in Unreal Engine is really tame, let's say, and friendly. So that shouldn't be a barricade for anyone. And then on top of that, there is a whole blueprint system that is also perfectly capable.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. There was another question about advice to improve your skills and becoming a better programmer. I think you already added to that. So are there some more tips you can give if you want to get better? What is your best advice? What do you do if you want to become a better programmer? Erick, maybe you can tell from your experience.
Yeah. In my opinion, the best thing you can do is do tutorials. Just grab some tutorials. They're very cheap tutorials on Udemy, for example, that I sometimes even to this day, I still buy them. And from time to time, I just get into them just to understand like a different way of doing things. And from my perspective, the best way to learn something is by doing it yourself, but also depending on the situation, you also want to see how somebody else is doing it so that you can learn some new skills from that person. So instead of wasting my time trying to do something on my own, sometimes I just try to follow a tutorial and see if there's anything of value that I can take from that. Yeah.
If I may add to this, because this is one topic that I'm kind of sensitive to, tutorials, especially Udemy, are great. I would just advise any let's say newcomers to the field to not to stay away from YouTube, but stay away from tutorial makers who make living from making tutorials and that have no industry background. So on YouTube, there are some awesome people that you can follow and you can learn a lot. And even to this day, like Erick said, like I would on a, let's say, bi-monthly basis, I would buy some course just to refresh on some topic. But YouTube is particularly dangerous. If one good test is if the thumbnail looks spectacular and it promises you that you will make wonders, you're probably better not opening that video at all. So just before accepting anyone's advice, do like a little bit of background check to see if this person is actually knowledgeable in the field, or if they are just good at making tutorials, which so at one point it will be harder to unlearn bad habits than to just learn them correctly from the first place, even if it takes a bit longer.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really good advice. Tove, you wanted to add something too?
Yeah, I totally agree with what both David and Eric has said. I also want to preface that if you also need some motivation, that kick, you don't know actually what you want to improve or like what you want to work on, do game jams. There are game jams going off all the time, and that's about like two projects that can be between one day to 3 days of you meeting new people, trying something new, seeing if it works or not, and it's a great way to develop as a programmer or a game developer overall.
Yeah, thank you. Game jams are always great way to meet people too. And Erick, you have to add something, and then I will give over to Helen because we have some more chat questions coming up for you.
Yeah, in my opinion, with books, I used to buy some books to learn as well, but I think by the time that you start learning from those books, the engines or the things that you're learning already change. So I would say that people should focus more on things that are more accessible really quickly.
Yeah, so great advice there. So I think we have a lot of great advice, and I see we have still some more questions from the chat, and maybe Helen can kick off some interesting ones.
Yeah, we've got some more technical questions actually. David just mentioned C++, and someone in the chat is very interested in that. They asked, how much do you actually use C++ in your day-to-day work? I get the notion that you use a lot of game engines which frequently abstract away over the real code. But what is your view on it? Erick, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, so in my current project, we use a lot of blueprints. So the game is very heavy in C++ as well, but depending on the conditions that we're in, I cannot really dive into details here. On my day-to-day basis is a lot of blueprints at the moment, but before this, I used to code every day, basically. I used to dive into code day and night, doing features in code. Is basically because it's more performance-wise to do things, and you can access some more parts of the code that you cannot access from blueprints. In this case, I'm talking about the Unreal Engine. It might be different with other things, but C++ is something that definitely something main tool for us.
Tove, can you also add something to that, or is that?
I don't think I can add that much actually, because 10 Chambers uses Unity, which is C#. So as a student, I used to code a lot in say C++, both in Unreal's version and like more pure C++, but in my day-to-day work, I use none.
All right, and David, how about you?
Yes, so in my case, it's a bit different because I would say 99% of my work is in code, so in C++ in this case, but also when it comes to blueprints, at least in this and the previous project, they were mainly used as like a tool to initialize something, to just set some values so that it's easier for the designers. For example, people who know a bit of about the Unreal, you can assign specific data assets or data tables through Blueprint to something, and this is way more convenient than just hard coding them in code. Blueprints are also kind of useful for quick prototyping, although for me also C++ now is advancing some issues that people were kind of afraid of, in particular memory management, are being solved, and it's now friendlier than ever, I would say, to get into. So I don't see it as an obstacle for anyone to learn it and just use it. Also, maybe Erick mentioned that it unlocks some features in the Unreal. So, for example, I do a lot with physics simulation, but also that's really like a difficult part, the multiplayer enabled physics, and all of those calculations that have to happen would be borderline impossible in Blueprint. Just from logistics, it would be hundreds of nodes connected, interconnected, looped, whatever. And in C++, it's basically a function of a few hundred lines, and that's it.
All right, thank you for that. Staying on the topic of programming, another person also asked, how relevant is graphics engine programming in your line of work, or rather your journey? What about in-depth understanding of how Vulkan, OpenGL, DirectX work and how they interact with the GPU? I gotta be honest, I only knew like half of those words, but I'm looking into smiling faces, so you know what they're talking about. Maybe Tove, you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that really depends on the size of your company. For me, 10 Chambers, we're like a little bit above 100 people. In my day-to-day work, not really. I think we rather have graphics programmers who work with that. So for me, no. I'm
Erick.
very little interested in graphics programming.
Okay.
That's like my least niche. Yeah.
I can add to that a bit. In particular, graphics programmers are some of the, in my experience, some of the smartest people I had a chance to interact with. And coming back to the question of math and linear algebra, if you have questions about math and linear algebra, ask a graphic programmer. They will certainly know it. But I think in our line of work, it's not directly needed, especially it's not needed to know particular API or framework, but I think any gameplay programmer could learn a lot from graphics programmers. So don't hesitate from like watching some tutorials or reading some material on that topic, because there is a lot that you can also use, especially on the math side. There are some solutions that are applicable to gameplay as well.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
I can also add something. When I started doing this whole path of doing Unreal and becoming what I'm doing right now, basically, I took my time to also learn a little bit about this. And honestly, I haven't had the chance to use it because it's something that the engine already takes care of a lot of things for you. There are some other positions that do more related work to that. Maybe technical positions, more like tech programmers, do more work related to this. But yeah, it's something that it's good to know, as David mentioned, but it's not something crucial for us gameplay programmers to know, basically.
All right.
So if I can add just a quick, why it's also good to know at least the basics is that some work that I'd say that CPU needs to handle can be offloaded to the GPU, especially if you're working with many instances of the same thing. So just knowing that on the surface level and not caring about the particular implementation, so but just knowing that something is possible will already unlock a lot of opportunities for you. I would put it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of not knowing things, another person also asked, did you once hit a barricade in terms of not knowing how to fix a certain problem in programming the game or something like that? If yes, what is the best solution to overcome this barricade? Erick, you're already nodding. Do you remember an instance?
Thank you for that. Yes, definitely. So for a while, I also work as a console programmer, dealing with a lot of different topics. And this is a bit of a darker area of coding because there's not many documentation about this out there. So I had to face issues like this is something that also a gameplay programmer can tackle, but it landed on my table, and it's something whenever you're working, let's say, on an Xbox, which has multiple people playing on different controllers, then you have to handle who's the owner of the game, for example, who is the one that can actually interact with the UI. Faced many times many barriers that I didn't know how to fix or how to get around them. And the best solution that you can do is like try to very patiently research on forums or documentation to see if you can find what you need. And if not, you have to start poking into lower parts of the systems that you're using to understand them. A very good example is Unreal Engine, in my case, uses a top-level UI system called UMG. And this thing goes down to the bottom to another system called Slate, which is very it's a bit more difficult to understand. So in those cases, diving into that system and reading the code and trying to get around the maze of how things are going through the input will let you understand and learn a few things about what you need to do.
I can add to that because what Erick said, diving into Unreal code is really valuable, and there is a this also comes to the misconceptions question, but in a different context. There is a misconception that engine code is something like a holy grail, that's something that's written perfectly and that it's working great. We have encountered many horrors in the not to put Unreal Engine in particular on the spot, because every game engine is like this. They, especially the engines that are made for more general purpose, they have some let's say oversights in their code, and sometimes digging inside of the code and understanding that modifying the engine is something that should be done at any moment, and it should be welcome in the company to be allowed to do so. Could help you like greatly. There were some issues in Unreal with instancing of something that I think like not even an intern would make such mistake, especially not an intern, because they are probably more worried about being scolded by someone. But we have encountered some horrible implementations in the code itself, and all of those are just oversights. I'm not blaming anyone for doing that on purpose. It's just like a wrong check here and there, and it's fixed by changing 2 letters, and you're fine. But sometimes digging like deeply into the engine and understanding how something works can also reveal some mistakes that were maybe troubling you on the higher abstraction level.
All right. Speaking of horrible things, someone asked, did you ever break a project on accident? And if so, were there any consequences? Did any of you ever have such terrible thing happen?
I can say something. I have done that, yes, but not a project on my studio. Personal projects, I have broken so many that I cannot count. But it's easy to fix. If you're working on a version control system, then you can just revert your changes and everything is sunshine again. So work alongside a version control system. JIT is a very popular one, very easy to set up for one person or for a small team. We on this industry, we're used to work with Perforce, which is a bit more powerful, but it's not as easy to set up for somebody that's coming into the game industry, basically.
All right, thank you.
If I may add, there was an interesting article about that, about the person causing 400 million in damages for some, not game related, but a junior programmer just basically dropping the production database with a few this should be approached differently. Someone starting in their career should not be able to do that, no matter what. So even if you destroy the project, in quotes, it should only happen on the what's called development branch or a feature branch, and it should be easily recovered from. Like Erick mentioned, we have a version controls systems. We also have some automated testing systems, and such things are games break on a daily basis, basically, but rarely in production, although it can happen. But then you should never blame someone just starting, like an intern or junior. You should blame how the pipeline is set up, and this should be addressed there, not on the side of the someone just starting in the industry.
That sounds like a sensible solution, definitely. We still do have a couple of questions, but not really much time left. So I'm just going to ask a few more questions and only direct them to one of you, if that's okay, so we can get through as many as possible. So one person asked, I've never really worked much in a team when it comes to creating games. Do you have any tips on how to reduce friction between work steps when working together? Tove, maybe you can take this one.
I don't really understand the question.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
They are asking how to best combine the efforts of the different teams, I think, how to reduce friction when working with others.
Ooh, compromising, communication and compromising. I think if you're passionate about games, you're going to have opinions about a lot. I think in the end, you're going to have to do what's best for the game and also respect other people's professional areas. And yeah, sometimes lay down your hatchet, sometimes fight for what you think is right. Yeah.
In life as in work, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you. David, you already talked a bit about optimization. Could you tell us how much of low-level optimization is actually part of your job? Is it done by you, by others? And if so, is it a continuous process or after the fact?
No, it's in my particular case, it is part of my job, but this is not a norm. Let's say in the majority of, especially when starting. And I would say it's a continuous process. It should. There is something to be said about the premature optimization, of course, and I would always argue that getting something to work first and then optimizing is a good path to take. But of course, you should not work on something for 6 months and then think about optimization. I'm more talking in a context of spend 2 weeks making something, spend another week trying to solidify it or harden it in the programmer jargon. So yeah, the optimization itself should be continuous, and it should be supported by tooling. So you should have exact statistics, like not the game feels slower. No, what is the frame rate drop and where is it happening, and since which version it started happening, and then we can proceed with trying to optimize.
Right. Someone also asked if working students are a frequent occurrence at the companies you've worked at, and also if you have any recommendations on what kind of companies to look out for if you do a praxis, like a practical semester when you're in uni. I think that's kind of hard to just ask one person. So maybe Erick, because you're in a big company in Germany, is that a thing at Fishlabs?
I believe that my studio does a lot of projects with kids and people that are trying to get into the industry, but I cannot really speak for all the other studios in Germany because I cannot say, or in Europe in general. I think it's something that is up to the person interested in this line of work to try to approach some studios and poke them. Regarding this, I think going to the normal channels like HR would be the best thing to do, to try to see if they have some kind of program like this and showing your interest to see if they can just put you in a queue or something that they can help you with.
All right. Tove, what's it been like at the companies you've worked at?
We 10 Chambers has had interns before. I guess that's what it's called. If you're a student and you have like a practical semester. And I think it's very common in Sweden that that a lot of companies take in interns because we have a lot of educations and it's a very smooth way to get an entry-level position. So yeah, definitely. If you're in Sweden, absolutely.
Awesome. And David, what's it like in Austria?
Yes, it's pretty much the same. I think in some technical universities, it's even a requirement to do, I think, one or two semester practical work. And in my experience, people who were working as interns first and then became like a junior or whatever were some of the most reliable and most well-versed or well-skilled people in the end. because you have this, let's say, grace period of 1 year where you are allowed to make mistakes, and there are no harsh consequences to you, and you will be able to learn. Like someone mentioned before, it's just important to stay humble and to leave your ego before joining the company, and you will learn a lot. One advice from my side would be to look for like a mid to a large sized company, because joining a really small company could give you a bit of unrealistic picture, and it might be a bit stressful as well, given some responsibilities that are not really well fitted for someone of that experience.
All right, thank you. I think those are great pieces of advice to end this panel on. I hope we could answer your biggest questions on gameplay programming. And if not, try to catch one of these 3 or any other gameplay programmers at a conference of your choice and ask them your questions in person. Thank you so much for participating, for asking questions, and for joining us in this panel. A special thank you to Tove, Erick, and David, who answered all of your questions and ours. I think we learned a lot tonight. I hope we will see all of you again at some point, and wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.